reached the end to World War I, and the document that kind of draws up the information at the end of World War I was the Treaty of Versailles. And the Treaty of Versailles actually led us into several other really important parts of history. So it's important that we understand all the different aspects of this. In class, we're going to be going through the Treaty of Versailles, provision by provision. But what I want you to understand before we do that is some of the background around the treaty and why the decisions were made the way they were. So, what did the Treaty of Versailles say and how did it impact history is the guiding question that we're going to be answering throughout this presentation. So, in the United States, after World War I had ended, Woodrow Wilson becomes a hero. He was the president during the war. He led the United States in its battle, and he really did help out Great Britain and France rather significantly during World War I. The problem is he begins to lose some of that credibility, some of that hero status when Republicans are starting to win in the individual states. And it's going to become this competition between Woodrow Wilson and Henry Cabot Lodge as to whether or not to accept some of the different pieces of the Treaty of Versailles. So Wilson meets with the Big Four in Paris. Big Four is comprised of the United States, Britain, Italy, and France. Germany, of course, is left out of the negotiations. Even though they were a huge part of World War I, we did not want them to be a part of the negotiations for the Treaty of Versailles. So some of the things that we had to compromise on with the treaty, the losers' colonial holdings, so Germany's colonial holdings would be controlled by the League of Nations. And the League of Nations was this idea that Woodrow Wilson had that we would create kind of a governing body that would take care of world affairs, essentially. The League would be included in the treaty. This was one of Wilson's big things, was that he really, really wanted this League of Nations. So with the final treaty, we had to work out compromises with France, Italy, and Japan over those colonized lands that I was just talking about, specifically in Northern Africa. Germany was forced to accept this treaty. They didn't have a choice. And it was frustrating to them because they did not participate in the treaty proceedings. And that's going to be one of the things that really, really angers Hitler and some of the other people during World War II is the idea that Germany was not included in the Treaty of Versailles. Only about 4 of the 23 principles of the 14 points were in the final treaty. So there was lots and lots of stuff that was left out that Wilson originally wanted. Treaty punishes Germany really, really harshly, and you'll see that when we look at the exact provisions of the treaty tomorrow. Like I said, Wilson had been forced to compromise. Essentially, it was based on morals, and it was mainly because he wanted to keep this League of Nations. So he compromised a lot of other things within the Treaty of Versailles solely to keep this League of Nations. One of the good points that was kept was that some of the minority people were liberated, specifically the Poles. So as the United States was looking at this treaty, there was a pretty big division as to how we felt about it. Some believed that it was too harsh to Germany. Some believed that it was too lenient to Germany. Isolationists, people who did not want the United States to be involved with anything outside of domestic issues, really hated that idea of a League of Nations. So that was going to be a huge point of contention for a lot of those people. So Wilson goes out on this campaign, this speech-making tour, in order to persuade people in the public that the treaty is a good idea. He had a stroke and died shortly after leaving office. So shortly after the election of 1920, he's going to die. And a lot of people believe that this stroke was a result of some of the stress that he was facing fighting for this League of Nations and fighting for the Treaty of Versailles. So in the election of 1920, the big focus obviously is the League of Nations. Woodrow Wilson made it a huge issue of debate throughout the campaign season. Wilson was not successful in his campaign, so Warren G. Harding ended up winning, and he won with this promise of a return to normalcy, basically meaning that the United States would return back to its normal behavior, that we would stay out of other people's affairs and just mind our own business. Women's votes were key in this election for the first time. Women had just recently gained the right to vote. This was a death sentence for the League of Nations. Once Harding came into office, that idea of the League of Nations completely went by the wayside. So that weakened League of Nations meant that the world was really unable to deal with some of the tensions that remained after World War I. And there were a lot of tensions, specifically in Germany. And this is going to be one of the things that leads from World War I to World War II. The U.S. hurt itself by remaining isolationist when it needed to take global responsibility. So there was a lot of blame put on the United States for not being a part of that League of Nations. And a lot of that blame, that World War I started, people believed was the result of the United States staying out of global affairs. So there it says right there, we are therefore somewhat to blame for the problems between the countries that led to World War II. And then there's this idea of Wilsonianism, which was American intervention, essentially, in global affairs, that the United States spread its democracy and capitalism, and that American influence could bring peace to the world. So those were the ideas that Wilson really pushed. And the ideas that really were not a part of things directly after World War I, which, like I said earlier, really led into a lot of the tensions for World War II. So make sure that you have these notes in class tomorrow so that you can participate in our discussion and our activity, and I'll see y'all then.